Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon, where we talk about the culture war, politics, and anything else that might come up. And today we have a very special guest, the host of the Irreverend podcast, the Reverend Dr. Jamie Franklin. Jamie, thanks so much for doing the show.
Nick, thank you for having me on. I'm really happy and excited to be here. So it's great to be on this platform, this new platform you've started. So thank you.
Well, thanks for doing it. Would it be fair to describe you as a based vicar?
Yeah, I saw somebody, after I was on James Delingpole's podcast, somebody described me as a based vicar. That was a couple of years ago. If I went on Delingpole now, I'm not sure, I don't know if I'd be based enough for his audience, but, I don't know. It's not for me to say, is it? Because it's a compliment, isn't it, Nick, I think. So am I based? I mean, let me put it this way. Compared to most vicars in the Church of England, I think I'd be considered based, but I'm not really sure that's saying very much.
Yeah, I think you're based, and it's funny though. Good point. If you went back on James now, you'd be the normie vicar who thinks that maybe dinosaurs are real.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe you don't think dinosaurs are real as a Christian. I don't know.
No, I do. I'm pretty convinced dinosaurs are real. Although I'm yet to hear. I've heard James saying they're not real, but I haven't heard him say why they're not real. So I'd be interested to. Because I've been to the Natural History Museum, I've watched Jurassic Park, so I've seen the images of the dinosaurs, but I'm open-minded, come on, convince me. I mean, do you know why they're not real?
Well, I think it's something to do with them being like anti-Christian propaganda. That's what I think. I'm not sure if James believes that. That's my belief, and I haven't done any research at all.
Yeah, no, I know that's what. James believes that that's the purpose of the purpose of the idea of dinosaurs, isn't it? But what I mean is, what is James's argument? His sort of evidential argument. How does he know? What are the fossils? Are they just? I mean, what are they? Where do they come from? Are they just bones that are just pieced together? That's the bit I don't know. Do you see what I mean?
The real question, Jamie, is who put them there and
yeah,
why?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know we were going to start with the dinosaurs, but it's a good start.
Fine.
There's so many things I want to ask you, but I thought maybe we could just start with. Sometimes I ask people how they got into what they're doing. It's quite a relevant question for you because. I believe you grew up in a Christian family, but you didn't really believe in it yourself. Yeah. And then at a certain point, you changed your mind. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And when did you change your mind and why?
Well, yeah. I mean, so growing up as in a Christian family. So I grew up with my mum, who's a Christian, my two brothers. So I think I've always been, for that reason, sort of sympathetic to the Christian worldview and sort of open to it, if that makes sense. But when I was growing up, I certainly, I just wasn't a Christian. I was very, very aware of the fact that I wasn't a Christian. I didn't. It wasn't even that I sort of rejected it or anything like that. It's just that I wasn't interested in it. I was just interested in other things. I was really interested in music when I was growing up. Playing in bands and stuff like that. And I loved, even though I wasn't very good at school, I loved literature and reading and all that kind of stuff, reading novels. And I used to write all the time and want to be a professional writer as well. That's another thing I wanted to do. So I was kind of interested in sort of culture and the arts and that kind of stuff, and probably considered myself to be quite edgy, but looking back, it was probably... somewhat of a delusional young man. Anyway, when I was at university, I studied English literature and philosophy at university for my undergraduate degree, and it's not the most sort of interesting story, I suppose, but I just met people who are my own age who are Christians. And I started reading the Bible for myself for the first time. I was quite troubled, I was quite a troubled young man. I used to, I don't know whether I'd say, I suffered from depression, but I certainly had low moods, pretty in quite a sort of intense way. But at the time, I kind of considered it to be part of my sort of edgy, sort of artistic persona. But nevertheless, I was pretty low quite a lot of the time. So it led me to, I suppose, being quite open-minded about, maybe I need to rethink this whole thing. So I met people who are Christians just through being at university, started reading the scriptures myself. And to be perfectly honest with you, Nick, just to be totally upfront, I believe I had powerful encounters with the divine through those experiences. When I went to church for the first time, it was in a charismatic evangelical setting, so completely different to the kind of setting I'm in now. Many years later, where I'm in a high church Anglo-Catholic setting now. But back then, yeah, I went to church, as an adult, really, for the first time, and it's the kind of church where, it's like a happy clappy church, to use that kind of terminology. And I'm just using it because I think people might be familiar with it. I don't mean it in a disparaging way, but guitars and drums and sermons which last like 45 minutes and all this kind of stuff. And I remember just feeling this great sense of cathartic uplift during the singing, which I'd never experienced anything like it in my life before, and I haven't had such a powerful experience since. But it was like a weight was lifted from my heart, and it was a transformative experience for me. I was 19 years old, and other things like that have happened subsequently, but there was a particularly powerful moment for me when that did happen. And then in the reading of the scriptures thing, I was, like I said, I was kind of troubled, and what I would do is I'd sort of stay up, not being able to sleep or whatever. As an undergraduate, your sleeping is all over the place anyway, and I wasn't doing any work because I was one of those types of undergraduates. And I just started reading the Psalms and started reading the Gospels, and I just remember, at night, and I just remember being confronted for the first time by the person of Jesus Christ. Really, for the first time, having to actually reckon with this man. Who is this man, and where did this story come from? And it just hit me. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. He is who he says he is. And I read John chapter 6, which is a chapter that describes some disciples deserting Jesus, and Jesus saying to his remaining disciples, are you going to desert me too? And the Apostle Peter replies to him, words to the effect that, no, Lord, for to whom shall we go? For you have the words of eternal life. And I remember reading these verses and just believing them. And I can't, it's hard for me to even articulate what that was like, but just having that sense that this man is who he says he is, and I believe this as well. And I had these experiences, and it led me to Christ. It led me to being baptized and to following him. And so I've been doing that for since then. So there you go.
Very interesting. What would you say to a cynic who says that what you experienced was just a kind of Tony Robbins sort of euphoria, but from the charismatic event?
Yeah. I love Tony Robbins, but I think he's fantastic, and I love that film. I'm Not Your Guru. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
The documentary is a brilliant film. Yeah, I think that this is something, when I was in that world, the evangelical charismatic world, for many years, and I've seen a lot of situations like that where I've wondered how much of this is God or the Holy Spirit, and how much of this is hype, how much of this is psychological manipulation. So, I think one doesn't want to be naive to the reality of that kind of thing. All I can say is that that experience was genuinely transformative for me, and in faith, I believe that was the work of the Holy Spirit. I think there's potentially a false dichotomy here, whereby one might say, well, that's just the uplift of the music, that's just the kind of psychological situation that was being brought about by that particular style of worship, and the way that the church was set up and everything like that. But who's to say that these things can't be used by God and the Holy Spirit? I mean, this is the way God works in the world, through ordinary human things. So I think there is an interesting question there about manipulation and about what's genuine and what's not. But I don't think there's these things are necessarily mutually exclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and as you say, it's always very hard to convey it. I mean, I had a dream where I saw God and Jesus, and it was definitely them. But imagine trying to convey that to people. I know, it's incredible, but I've not been able to convey that either. And I had a feeling that I've never had any other time, conscious or unconscious, where it was what it was actually a giant cross in the sky, was what it was. Rather, is how it appeared, and what it was a strange feeling of similar to you mentioned that oh, it's actually all real, and the awe of that. But then a kind of almost a weird fear of that, like if it is, that changes kind of everything, you know that because it's kind of like they were looking at me as well. So it's like if God and Jesus are definitely real, you might sort of say they are or believe it, but when to actually sort of feel what that is like, that was what the dream was like. It was actually feeling the reality of that, and it was overwhelming. Yeah, because it almost sort of frightening to a degree, as well as euphoric.
Yeah. I mean, there are always things that you can say, aren't there, to counter these kind of things. You know, you could always say, well, this is just, this is the product of your subconscious. There's no, it doesn't prove anything if you have a particularly vivid dream and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's our decision as to how we're going to interpret these things. Are we going to interpret them with the eyes of faith, or are we just going to dismiss them? And in many ways, I think that's something that comes across. That sort of question is a question that comes up over and over again in the Gospels with the different encounters that Jesus has with people. But when did that? How long ago did that happen to you, Nick? Because that's really interesting.
It was a few years ago when I was doing, maybe 2019, when I was doing a show. I believe it was 2019, and I was researching things a lot, and I was watching a lot of videos, of course, about Jesus and things. So of course people say that that's just what was going on.
Yeah.
And so I was really kind of immersed in it. I'm still not very good on the actual theology or details of the Bible. I'm very poor on, but I was watching a lot of YouTube videos. I was doing it that way about the Shroud of Turin or the resurrection, because I think the key question is whether you believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And when I've asked Christians, quite a lot of them go, yeah, or I don't know, or like they haven't thought about it. I think that's mad, because to me that's the key question. But you'd be amazed how many people have asked and they don't have a strong view on it.
Were they Anglicans by any chance?
One of them was actually a Catholic who came to it later, but yeah, some of them are churchmen. I'm trying to think who I asked now. I've asked a few people, I just remember thinking, why is no one like more bothered about this? I mean, I'm sure loads of people are that It just must be the people I happen to ask.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's pretty shocking, isn't it, when people are unclear about a question like that. But one of the interesting things about the thing you said about your dream is you said you saw a cross suspended in the sky. Is that right?
Right.
And it reminds me of the Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity. He was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity in the beginning of the 4th century. The story is that before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which I think was in 312, he had a vision of a cross suspended in the sky, and I don't know whether he heard. I think he heard the words "in hoc." What is it? In hoc signia, and then something. The word for conquer. But anyway, the word mean the Latin phrase means by this sign conquer, right? So I've forgotten what the actual phrase is. But anyway, that thing about the cross suspended in the sky is very reminiscent of the Emperor Constantine's vision. And then of course he took the image of the cross into battle on a banner, and then won this battle, and then he converted to Christianity. And this marked the moment at which the Christian religion had grown from a tiny sect, really a handful of people, to being the official religion of the Roman Empire, which is the greatest empire that the world has ever seen. So it's a pretty amazing story, really.
Wow, and that is interesting. And someone I knew who is a hardcore Christian suggested that I had seen, because I'd been in LA.
Yeah.
And actually in the dream I was driving towards it. So they suggested that I'd actually just seen this. Apparently there's a place in LA where you see a big cross if you drive along a certain road. So they claimed I was just remembering, even though they still thought it was very powerful, they said you might be remembering that. I was like, am I just remembering LA? So that was but I prefer your interpretation.
Yeah. You're like a new Constantine.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe I'll start an empire. But the other, because and by the way, a few things you said I want to come back to, because I have an MA in literature. I also was a sort of artsy person. I think it's interesting that artsy people are now on our side of things, whatever you want to call that side. I call it the normal people side. But, Peterson believes that if you're high in openness, you're sort of, you're naturally a liberal or a lefty, and that's completely out of date, because now you're much more likely, in my opinion, to be countercultural if you're high in openness, which means you're more likely to be conservative now. So that's a little pet theory of mine. But
interesting.
The only difference is I've still got the depression, but I'm glad you've got rid of it to a large extent. So, but what I wanted to pick up on there is see what you think to this little theory of mine. So I was trying to convince Carl Benjamin to be a Christian,
right?
And he said he was more open to the subjective dream experience than he was the rational argument I was trying to make, which I thought was rational, which I was saying, it hit me at a certain point, watching a lot of Jordan Peterson and things like this. I was watching him, and he basically had a kind of Christian ethics. It was a kind of meta Christianity that he's proposing that has been incredibly successful because it's not Christianity, because a new generation of people, they have a bad image of Christianity, so they won't listen. But if he comes in with a kind of Christian ethics, they're open to listening to it. But the flaw of it, to me, was that he doesn't really have the spiritual belief, or he's very ambiguous about his spiritual belief. So I was thinking, okay, it's all nice to have the ethics, but you need the actual belief part. And then I suddenly realized one day, what if you just could autonomously or unilaterally decide to believe? And then I suddenly realized maybe that's how it's always been, because God's just not going to show up. He did in my dream, but in general, he's not just going to show up and say, here I am, these are the rules to follow. So it's always been about faith, and it's actually been about us upholding God rather than the other way around. And so we should just, like adults, decide to believe, knowing that it's better for us and better for society. What do you think to that idea?
So, I mean, can I just clarify what you're trying to say there? So are you trying to say that you used to think that belief was something that was sort of generated for us by God? Is that what you're saying? And you've kind of gone on a thought process which has led you now to the place where you realise that faith is actually about taking responsibility yourself for what you believe and making a conscious decision. Or I'm just trying to grasp.
Yeah, that was it, because lots of people say to me things like, oh, I just don't believe, or I just don't feel that way, and I sort of think maybe you haven't made any effort. And then later I had that dream, which seemed to me more like the kind of reward of it. But initially it was a logical choice. I mean, it's a little bit similar to what Peter Hitchens says, probably a less advanced version, but he just says, which world would you rather, and you've interviewed him on Irreverent, which world would you rather live in? One where your actions have moral consequences and meaning, or one where it's all just random? So he chooses faith over atheism because he prefers that world, given there's no evidence for either, or not sufficient evidence. So my thing is similar to that. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. It's like it's quite similar anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think I agree with what you're saying. So, what we believe in life more generally, a lot of the time there's a lot of the time the things that we believe are to do with what we prefer. I think that's definitely true. Whether or not we believe in God is largely to do with our preference as to whether or not God exists. Let's put it that way. And whether or not we believe in Christ is largely to do with our preference as to whether Christ is who he says he is, or whether the stories about Christ are true, and so on and so forth. And again, you can see this, I think, when you read through the Gospels, the way people respond to Jesus. It's not most of the time a kind of conversation about rationality or evidence or anything like that. It's who do you say I am, and what are the consequences going to be for you if you really accept that I am who I say I am. There's this great TV show on at the moment called The Chosen. I don't know whether you've come across this show, but have you seen this?
No, I've heard you mention it. I haven't watched it yet. I watched Messiah. I've watched Risen. I was interested in this Chosen.
Yeah, so just the point I was going to make is that it just dramatizes this really, really well. If you take a character like Nicodemus, who was like a high-ranking Pharisee and everything like that, so the establishment was a certain way. He had a really high place in it, at least in this dramatized version. And then this Jesus comes along. He's a controversial character, and if Nicodemus, if he goes along with it, you see, he's going to lose everything. He's going to lose his status as a high-ranking Pharisee. He's going to lose the respect of his peers and his underlings. His wife is going to be angry with him, and all of this stuff. It's an embellishment. It's not all there in the gospel. It's an imaginative embellishment. But you see, there'll be a cost to recognizing the claims of this man. So it's not just about whether or not you're convinced in a kind of evidential sense. Do the prophecies in the Old Testament tally up with who this man appears to be, or something like that? It's actually in my heart, and am I willing to countenance the idea that this might be real, and am I willing to pay the cost of what the implications might be? And of course, you could think of all sorts of examples. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Brideshead Revisited, Evelyn Waugh's novel, but that novel hinges around a very similar kind of thing, to do with the character. I forget her name. I can't remember any of the names of the characters, but basically one of the characters has to end an affair with Charles Ryder, played by Jeremy Irons in the TV show, because ultimately she comes to accept the claims of the Roman Catholic Church, and it's this wrestling that she goes through, and at the end it's very, very moving in the TV show. The TV show is amazing, but at the end of the story, you know, she gives this speech where she says, you know, if I were to carry, words to the effect, not exactly these words, but, you know, if I were to carry on this affair with you, I would be shutting God out of my life forever, and I can't do that. So she had to wrestle with the implications of belief, and that is, you're exactly right in that sense. You're exactly right. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, the implications of belief is interesting because it's a bit like, well, Hitchens again has talked about it, when you change your opinions and you're going to lose all your friends, or if you don't go along with, let's say, the COVID narrative, whatever it is. There are a lot of situations where you're like, oh no, I'm going to have to believe this now, and there's going to be a certain cost to it. But I have to say, maybe I'm wrong with my argument, because I have not been able to convince anyone that it's up to them to believe in God as a sort of social responsibility. I mean, even Carl, who believes in Aristotle's 4 character types, in the continent man and the virtuous man, all these, there's a 4 character type, and he believes in doing things for the sake of like, you should have children because it's good and the right thing to do, for example. But he hasn't managed to do it with Christianity. I was like, you admit that society would be better if we were still a strongly Christian country, but yet you don't do it yourself. You know, there's that Gandhi thing, be the change you want to see in the world. So isn't that a kind of hypocrisy? Although you could say it about me because I don't have children, and I believe that's the way to be. So maybe we're all a bit like that. But yeah, I have to say, I've not had any luck convincing anyone using my rationale. But the thing is, Nick, though, that I think it's important to say this, is that the reason to believe in Christianity isn't because it will produce beneficial effects in society. The reason to believe in it is because it's true, because it's the truth, right? And it's because it's true that it brings about beneficial effects in people's lives and in society. Now, I think the point I was trying to make, and maybe I didn't make it entirely clearly, but I think the point I was trying to make is whether or not you believe is it's a choice. Let's put it like this: it's a choice that God has left open to us. So I mean, I don't agree that there's as much evidence for atheism as there is for the truth of Christianity, because I think atheism is a ridiculous worldview, which is basically a belief in magic. But anyway, leaving that aside for a minute, having alienated and offended all the atheists who are listening to this, and I'm happy to back that up as to why I think that. But anyway, the point is that we don't have overwhelming evidence one way or another. Most people don't have, you know, Jesus Christ appearing to them in a dream and saying, you know, come and follow me. God has left this open to us because he wants us to freely come to him, right? This is an argument that C.S. Lewis makes very powerfully, and by implication in the Screw Tape Letters. You know, he can woo, but he cannot ravish. He doesn't want to take us by force. He wants us to come to him of our own free will, as you would woo a lady, let's say. So that's the point I'm trying to make. But I think this thing maybe I'm countering you here, I'm not really sure, but the thing I would just want to be clear about is the reason to believe it is because it's absolutely true, and it's you know, this is, I don't know, maybe it's helpful to some people, but it's not a necessary component of everybody's faith. But I'm absolutely convinced that the intellectual basis of Christianity is just far superior to the intellectual basis of any other belief system, and I think you can demonstrate that as well. So I've got a lot of time for that kind of thing. No, you're absolutely right. It's not the reason to believe in it just because it's better for society. That was just an argument I was trying on some people who weren't convinced. You know, because you can't just say to them, well, it's true. They go, well, no, it's not. I was like, well, what about this? That was just an attempt. But and you're right, and there's plenty of evidence.
It's great you're trying, Nick. I mean, it's fun. Most Christians don't try, so it's brilliant.
I've had a crack at it, but with little success. Yeah, that's very interesting. I've listened to Mere Christianity a few times. I haven't got onto Screw Tape Letters, but I do love
Tape Letters. Honestly, it's one of my favourite books of any type ever. It's just brilliant, fantastic book. Read it immediately.
I need to get onto it. And go on.
No, you go on.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and this idea that atheism is magic, maybe you could explain that. Because one thing I do say to atheists who attack me on Twitter, or they say, oh, you believe in the sky wizard, you believe in the imaginary friend. I always think, I don't necessarily say it, but I always think, so this random Twitter person their claim is they're smarter than C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, all these figures throughout history we could name. I always think that's incredibly unlikely. Yeah. So that's one thing I think. But what's your point about that it's a belief in magic? You mean the Big Bang?
Yeah. I mean, I go back to Thomas Aquinas, right? The distinction between necessity and contingency. So everything in this world is contingent, meaning that it's dependent upon something else, and the universe itself is clearly contingent. It doesn't have to exist by necessity. Now, of course, some people might say that it does, but that just strikes me as that's just a dogmatic belief, isn't it? How could you possibly demonstrate that the universe exists by necessity? It's quite clear to me and anyone who's honest that the universe doesn't exist by necessity. It's a thing like the things we see around us, like this desk or like you or me. So it raises a question, which is, where did the universe come from, right? If the universe is not necessary, if it doesn't necessarily exist, meaning that it doesn't depend on anything else, but the universe does depend on something else, where did it come from if it's contingent? If that makes sense. Now, the atheist answer to that must be, well, either it is necessary, but I don't believe it is, and I don't believe that can be demonstrated, like, the universe has just existed forever, which is just an article of faith, or that the universe just started to exist. So it just popped into existence out of nothing. And that's what I meant when I said it's like a belief in magic, because can you imagine something that's more magical than that? There just being nothing. So nothing meaning the lack of existence of absolutely anything. So nothing has no causal properties. So nothing can't cause anything because there's just nothing that exists. There's nothing there. There's just a void. Not even a void. There's just an absence. And then suddenly the universe just pops into existence. I mean, who could possibly believe such a thing? It's total nonsense. The only answer to the question that makes any sense is that there is something necessary that caused the universe. And that is what, in the words of Thomas Aquinas, that is what we mean by the word God. A necessary being who created the universe. That's what Aristotle believed using reason. It's what Thomas Aquinas believed, and it's correct. So that's what I meant. Somebody like Bertrand Russell in the 20th century, he said about the existence of the universe, it just is. The universe just is. It's a brute fact. But for me, that's not an explanation. It's just not. Basically, it comes down to a choice. Do you believe that the universe just is, or do you believe that God just is? And it seems to me to make far more sense to say that God just is than to say the universe just is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And people also think that atheists have won all the arguments. And it's like, well, watch William Lane Craig versus Christopher Hitchens, and he wins every one, Craig. He has better arguments.
There's no argument. There's no argument for atheism. It's just, the arguments are, look, the arguments are that you don't, so these are, again, this goes back to Thomas Aquinas. Sorry, I'm getting my high horse here. I know, it's great talking to you because you're a comedian, you're light and fun, but sometimes we have to go back to scholastic metaphysics, right? So the arguments are, number one, in Thomas Aquinas, these are the only two he considers, and that's because they're the only two there are. The arguments are, we don't need God to explain the universe, which I've just been speaking about, and number two, that there's all this evil and suffering in the world, and that this is incompatible with the existence of a good God. Those are the only two arguments, and Aquinas demonstrates why both of them do not work. They're not persuasive enough to force a belief in atheism, or even to make it seem more plausible. The people like Richard Dawkins and his ilk think that modern science has somehow provided a basis for atheism, but it's just, when you actually listen to what these people are saying, it's just absolutely palpably obvious to anyone who knows what they're talking about that somebody like Richard Dawkins does not understand the first thing about classical theism or scholastic metaphysics. Like he doesn't understand the distinction that I've been hinting at between beings and being, right? So he thinks that if you can explain how an organism evolved, or how all organisms evolved, then you have explained you have explained everything about the nature of the universe. But what he fails to understand is that you haven't explained everything about the nature of the universe, because you haven't answered the question, why is there something rather than nothing, which is the question of being itself. Right, so the question isn't, how did I evolve from a single-celled organism? The question is, why does anything exist at all? And evolutionary theory doesn't say anything about that whatsoever. It's complete irrelevance to it. And Dawkins doesn't understand that basic fact about the conversation. He writes 500-page book, The God Delusion, or however long it is. I mean, it's a long book, which I've read. But he doesn't understand that basic fact, which you would learn in an A-level philosophy class. So it's embarrassing.
Well, next time I see him, I'll say, Dawkins, you've got no idea about scholastic metaphysics.
You need to slap him across the face with a pair of leather gloves. Was that on your podcast? I heard on some podcast somebody was saying that somebody needed to be slapped with a pair of leather gloves. I'm not advocating that. That's just a joke. I have to say these things, Nick, because people will then say, "Oh, you're a vicar. You shouldn't be saying that kind of thing." It's just a joke, right?
Vicar advocates violence on podcast, on right-wing podcast. Yeah.
Podcast, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's so funny about Dawkins, because Sam Harris has done a similar thing where he's like, we've got all the telescopes now. We've got the telescopes. We've looked at this whole sky, and God's not there, guys. We've done the research. I mean, imagine saying that in public as an intellectual. That's shocking.
It's just. I mean, maybe he doesn't mean it, but maybe he's just having a joke. But I kind of think he does mean it. I kind of think he doesn't understand that Christians don't believe that God is a being who exists somewhere in the universe. Like, he actually thinks that, I think there's a man in the sky, living on Neptune, who's really big and really powerful. That's the complete ineptitude of these people. They cannot grasp the first thing about what Christians actually believe. What they do is they kind of aim their critique towards less sophisticated forms of the faith, rather than actually bothering to learn what somebody like Thomas Aquinas actually said about God, because they're intellectually lazy. I mean, that's the reality of it. They just can't be asked. I mean, you could quite easily learn about the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas by reading a basic textbook on Thomas Aquinas and engaging with what he's saying. But Dawkins appears to have Googled, Thomas Aquinas 5 ways, thought about it for about 30 seconds, and then written it down and published it in the God Delusion. But there are numerous errors of basic comprehension. Anyway, I'll stop going on about this. It's just a bit of a hobby horse.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I do believe in the man in the sky, but in general, you're right. It's a straw man. It's a straw man for their fans, and it's very much what, I mean, Chris Hitchens was a brilliant speaker, but if you watch him against William Lane Craig, Craig's advocating the philosophical arguments, he's explaining them, and they're very formal, and Hitchens just is not engaging with them at all, because he's not interested in that. He's just saying, here are my parlor tricks from my book, which is, it's fine, but they're talking completely different languages. And that's similar with Harris. What do you think to this naive question? Speaking of naive questions and beliefs, I mean, I have plenty. So
yeah, that's fine. It's great.
Lewis, this is something that I've wondered about. Like C.S. Lewis obviously talks about the basis, the reason God is the basis of conscience and morality in things like mere Christianity. But I sometimes wonder about, why do you think everything is set up, or what would the atheist argument be for why everything's set up as it is? For example, delayed gratification, the existence of conscience, the existence of morality. Why is it we have to eat sort of broccoli or something, and we can't just eat ice cream endlessly? Why couldn't we have had a world where we could just do any vice we wanted and there was no punishment? Why do you think vice and virtue exist?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really deep question, Nick. This is
thought of it myself.
I mean, it's a really, really good question. It's a very, very deep question. Well, I mean, a couple of things occur to me to say in response to this. So, God has clearly set up the world so that we might develop and grow spiritually. Let's put it like that, in kind of broad terms. This is what God wants. He wants growth. He wants development. And it's not just in a spiritual sense for human beings, but it's the way that the universe operates, isn't it? There's a kind of this is something that the great humanist Christian M. Scott Peck talks about in his book, The Road Less Travelled. There are these two forces at work in the universe, grace and entropy, he calls them. Entropy is the propensity that things have to break down and to become more chaotic, and grace is this force which seems to exist in the world, which is willing, if you like, development and order and beauty. And we see that in human lives as well, and both in terms of the growth of human bodies, but in terms of our souls and our minds as well. Grace, ever greater levels of order, harmony, beauty, understanding, and so on and so forth. So there's something about that process which God obviously values. There's something about that which must be precious in the sight of God. And you can say that, you can say the same thing about faith as well. You could say, well, why does God want us to have faith? Why does he want us to grow and develop in faith? He could just give us the capacity to believe wholeheartedly with no doubt. But there's something about that God values, that God wants. He wants us to have faith. He wants us to have trust. There's something inherently valuable about these things. Just to take that thought one step further, you could say that there's a sort of aesthetic quality to it. There's something beautiful about faith. There's something beautiful about trust. There's something beautiful about learning, about growing, about developing. The world would be a lot less interesting without these things, if we were just given it all on a plate, if you like. The final thing that I'd say about this, just as a sort of first answer, is that this is something that God is so interested in, that he actually entered into it himself in the person of Christ in the incarnation. So in the book of Hebrews, for example, it talks about Jesus learning obedience through what he suffered, right? So there was something about Jesus which grew and developed and learnt. Let me phrase that slightly differently. In his humanity, Jesus grew and developed and learnt and suffered like human beings do. So God himself has made it such that he would even participate in this process himself, even though it's not part of God's nature to learn and grow and develop, because God, as he is in himself, doesn't do any of those things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty remarkable thing, really. I don't know if any of that makes sense, Nick. But don't you think it would be just so much more boring if you didn't need to, eat broccoli or make a sort of intellectual effort to learn things, or lift weights to become more muscular, or do you know what I mean? It would just you'd be losing the essence of life, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, and there'd be no good films with training sequences like Warrior or Rocky.
I just watched Rocky the other day, funnily enough. I literally just watched it 2 days ago. I've not seen it for many years, but it's a fantastic film. Sorry.
It's great and much more quirky than people would realise. Yeah. And have you ever seen Warrior?
Yeah, I've seen that, about UFC.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the great movies of all time, underrated.
It's a good film.
So my response to that is, what would the atheists, though? Very interesting points, but would the atheists say simply that when we were out there trying to survive on wherever we were, the plains or wherever we were, that we needed an incentive, and the incentive was things like sugar, but it would have just been a little bit of fruit, and now we've got far too much. We needed to strive towards getting it for survival, so we needed endorphins when we had sugar and such things. Is that where it comes in?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the evolutionary just so story, isn't it? Which can be invoked to explain absolutely everything. I guess what I'd say about that is it's a question of whether you believe that is plausible as an explanation for all human striving towards growth, towards order, towards beauty, towards achievement. Because it seems to me that it's completely inadequate. So if you take an example, the visual arts or architecture or something like that, what evolutionary just so story are you going to invoke to explain why people decided to build buildings like the cathedral at Chartres in the High Middle Ages, I mean, this is what this is doing is it's an expression of humanity's desire to commune with the divine through art, through artistic design, through architecture, and so on and so forth. So I just don't think those kind of explanations really satisfy that longing within the human soul. And you don't even have to even be that extreme. I just think the whole concept of aesthetic order and beauty is something that we all instinctively understand, and it's completely unnecessary from an evolutionary perspective. Why would it be the case that you would need to lay your dinner table in a way which is aesthetically pleasing from an evolutionary perspective? You have to go to such lengths to kind of try and produce one of these explanations. The fact is, human beings we're drawn towards order and beauty and away from chaos and ugliness, and that's because there's a transcendental. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say transcendental. Transcendent dimension to reality, which we desire to commune with. That's why we do these things, because we want to reach out, as it were, in our hearts towards beauty, towards order, and it's way more interesting than just saying, oh, when we were out on the plains, it was better if we had our shacks or our huts ordered in a way which was, I don't know, where our tools were accessible, or do you know what I mean? I don't even know what you'd say. What would you even say?
No, exactly. On art, that would be very difficult to make that argument. And I think about that a lot. Why is some art inherently good, which I say it is? I mean, a movie works or doesn't. Like Warrior works, many films don't. And they just don't work. Yeah. And even in comedy, on a humble level, trying to write jokes, which I did for 11 years, well, still did the other day for someone, but for myself, I did it in stand-up, and you try and do it, and it wouldn't work, and then it would just come to you, kind of as revelation, if you like, whatever, in a small R, but it would, the ones you thought of intellectually wouldn't work, and then something would just hit you, and that was the right joke, and you knew it in your gut. And this has been the way with me with everything, when it comes to which podcast I should do, what the title should be, and this is the thing, and that's on a humble level. On a much greater level, the great books and the great movies, they're just inherently right. And so art seems to have an inherent quality to it. And this idea that everything's subjective and relative, it's just not true. I mean, that's why woke movies are so bad as well. They're ideological and rubbish.
Yeah, and Nick, this is a really important point. And it's actually, I mean, this is so important, because this is about, this really comes down to the issue of whether or not you believe in reality. I mean, I don't really know how else to put this. There is such a thing as good and evil. There is such a thing as right and wrong. There is such a thing as beauty and ugliness. Those things all belong in the same categories, right? So when you get these have you seen these adverts now where you have, and I'm not wishing to be offensive to people who are overweight, okay, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but when you have a morbidly obese ice skater, a female ice skater, promoting, I think she was promoting sanitary towels or something like that, and the very clear implication of the advert is that this woman's body is beautiful and she's morbidly obese. I mean, it's not like she's just slightly overweight. It's, she weighs 18 stone or something like that. I mean, she's huge. What these people are saying by implication is that beauty is just about it's just about accepting yourself. It's just about body positivity. It's not about any kind of objective standard that exists out there in the world or in the transcendent dimension or anything like that. It's just about you feeling positive about yourself. That's a denial of reality. There is such a thing as aesthetic beauty, and you can see this in art as well. Obviously, I mean, modern art is just a sort of collective denial of the reality of beauty. You according to the kind of theory of modern art, you could put you could put Michelangelo's David next to a cow that's been chopped in half and put in formaldehyde by Damien Hirst, and basically say, well, we can have a debate about which one of these is more beautiful or which one of these is the greater artwork. We have to recover the reality that some art is good and some art is bad, because there is some kind of objective standard of beauty and goodness out there in the world, and it conforms to it to a great, or participates in it to a greater or lesser degree. And I don't know, I haven't actually thought about humour, but I'm sure it must be the same thing for jokes and things like that. There is a kind of grace to humour, isn't there, which some people are able to tap into more than others, and that's why some people are just naturally funny. I mean, how can you explain these things apart from just to say that there is actually some kind of, I don't know what humour is. I mean, humour to me is a mysterious thing. It seems to me to be about I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about this, but humour to me seems to be about making connections between things. There seems to be something sort of common to me in jokes where you're sort of connecting two concepts in an interesting way, or you're inviting people to take a leap from one place to another. I'm speaking very abstractly, but nevertheless, you know what I mean. Some people are just funny, some people are just able to do it, and some people are less funny. So I don't know, I'm rambling a bit here.
No, absolutely. And I realised I basically was describing Roger Scruton's Why Beauty Matters. Have you seen that documentary?
I haven't seen it.
Exactly what you were saying.
I've not seen the documentary. I've met him and I've been in a seminar with him on aesthetics, though. So he was just such a great man.
What was it like to meet him?
He's great. He's such a great man. So it was when I was doing an MA at King's College London at the time, and we'd read this book on his book on beauty, actually. And he was there, and he had his hair all crazy, and he had like a crumpled up piece of paper where he'd written about 5 words, in scrawled like black ink, and he was using this as the basis of his lecture. This tiny kind of crumpled piece of paper, and just absolutely killing it. And then at the end, there was a sort of young postmodern type girl there, very nice girl, but very much sort of inculcated in the way of things. And she said to him, she obviously didn't like his book, and she said to him, I don't like what you said here. You're trying to make out there's some kind of objective standard to beauty, and really what all this is all this book is just your own opinion. And she said it in quite a sort of for an English kind of situation, British sort of culture, it was a bit sort of almost a bit rude. It's okay though. I mean, it wasn't rude, but it was going that way. So she was, this is just your opinion. And he said to her, I mean, he was totally cool, like he was just completely relaxed, and he said, yes, absolutely, it is my opinion, and it's up to you to tell me why I'm wrong. And it was just such a great response. Like everyone fell about laughing, and I just thought, oh man, you're just the man. He's the man.
What a legend. Yeah, and he did this documentary, Why Beauty Matters, about why there is inherent beauty, why beauty is important in art and architecture and so on. And you could contrast that with the Shock of the New, which was a series by Robert Hughes, which was about modern art. So modern art is another one of these, I suppose, psyops, a kind of another attack on the on morality and objective beauty. And I suppose it all comes down to God, whether it's leftist politics, whether it's ugly modern art, it all comes back to that. Interesting. And comedy, just a word on that. Yeah. Comedy is objective. People always say humor's subjective, and no, it's not. I've said this for ages. So it's not subjective, and you learn this very brutally when you start stand-up. So I did all these open mics for the first year with sort of, nice but often mentally ill people. And then I went into the Comedy Store, and you do this to do the Gong Show, and it's 400 people, and they can hold up 3 yellow cards, and when you have 3, they gong you off. Yeah. I didn't get a single card. I won the thing. The Comedy Store wanted to represent me as an Asian. I got a crown. It was the peak of comedy. I was 1 year into comedy, and that was as good as it got. Wow. But the point was, I really wanted to be in that environment where you'd be tested, because when you're in a small room that's they're all comics and it's a nonsense environment, you couldn't really tell who was any good. Whereas on that stage, it was very, very clear who was good. Anyway, that sounds like I'm boasting. The point is, you can either do it or you can't. And then at the higher echelon, do you prefer Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle? That's up to you. That is subjective, but whether you can do it or not, you know what I mean? And I was funny when I was 10. I'm less funny now because I'm very serious and I've dialed it down. But when I was 10, I was making the whole class and the teacher laugh. So it was a God-given gift. Yeah. And that's all there is to it. So let's just bring that out slightly more. So there's a
there's an objective element to it, and there is also an element of personal preference as well. And you could say that about all the arts, really, couldn't you? You could say, well, I prefer Mozart to Beethoven, but what you can't say is that Beethoven is an idiot and his composition was terrible. You see what I mean? So personal preference and subjectivity does come into it. The other thing I just want to embellish slightly is when you said it all comes down back to God. Yes, that's absolutely right, and that's because in my view, correct way of thinking about God, God doesn't just pronounce as to what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. God is those things within Himself. So when we are reaching out for these things, when we're attracted to these things, as all human beings are, unless we deny it, what we're actually doing is we're seeking for the face of God, because God actually is these things. He is the sort of he's the place where all of these things find their rest, find their fulfillment. So the reason that we have all this crap modern art and this ugly architecture, if you go to sort of ex-communist bloc countries in Eastern Europe, or you go to Russia or whatever, where you have all that, solent, ugly architecture, which just makes you feel depressed. The reason, you could give multiple examples of ugly architecture in our country today, but the reason you have all this is because people stop believing in God. And so they lose that sense of the transcendent. They lose the sense of human beings being made in the image of God, and that being some way reflected in our architectural environment and our aesthetic environment in general. And so you just get the embrace of ugliness. And with modern art, what it is there's nothing left apart from pure subjectivity, which is why shocking art is so prevalent. Is because once you sort of abandon that standard of transcendence and beauty, the only thing really you've got left to do is shock people, or try and wrest their interest in some way. So I think that's why you have this kind of thing of, well, let's see what kind of outrageous thing we can do in terms of like sexual perversion, or in terms of just banality, where like the fountain, the urinal. The thing about that is it's just
Duchamp.
Yeah, Duchamp. The thing about that is it's just all it is what it's saying. Well, this is what art is now. So that's kind of, well, I guess that's sort of interesting that now that's what we think art is, and art is something that you piss into. So, and that's it. That's where we've come to. And the question is this the kind of world you really want to live in? Do you want to live in that world? Or do you want to live in the world of the cathedral at Notre Dame and Michelangelo's David? So that's my question to the atheist.
Interesting, yeah. Duchamp did that urinal, and it's funny once, it's kind of amusing once, and then after that it's just chaos and despair, because you make the point once, what if this was just art? Oh, very clever, but actually that's the end of that point. It's already been completed then. And everything after that, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, is all pointless.
Yeah, and there's no like the thing we were talking about earlier. There's no growth. There's no development. There's no technical aspect to it. There's no room for genius. There's no room for the prodigy to wow us all with his God-given talents. It's just utter banality, and it's so boring.
The trouble is, real art is slow and difficult. I mean, even with comedy, maybe I just wasn't good enough, but I always thought this new trend where people have to bash out a new special every year. Louis C.K. at his peak was probably the only one, whatever you think of him, was probably the only one that could do it to a high level. Everyone else, you could see the quality suffer, because it's just too hard to write that many good bits and jokes. And real art, you have to learn under a master for painting your little brushstrokes for years and years, don't you? So who wants to do that?
It's a skill. It's a skill. I mean, it's not a skill I've ever cultivated, although I do consider myself to be reasonably funny, but you have developed a trade, haven't you? Just like you would if you were a musician, or if you were a carpenter, or if you were anything else.
Yeah, and people who've done it know that even if you hate my comedy and see clips on the internet and say I'm rubbish, when you're in the moment, when you're live in the room, actually, it's funny you said about the face of God. The guy who discovered Michael McIntyre once said to me when he'd see certain live gigs I did, he said that they touched the face of God, which was kind of sounds ridiculous for comedy, and obviously it's sort of hyperbole and being funny, but when you're in the zone on stage and it's really working and you're riffing and all that and you're using the crowd, it does transcend.
Yeah.
But anyway, I gave it all up because the industry is so disgusting.
Yeah.
And here we are doing podcasts and commentary instead. But which is a shame. And one thing I'm surprised I haven't asked you about yet, because we've already done quite a long time and I haven't even got into what I thought it was going to be about, was the decline of Christianity in this country and what we can do about it, and in the West, because we grew up. I know it's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll try and narrow it a bit.
No, it's great.
We grew up. We're probably a similar age, and we grew up, I imagine, in a world where we took Christianity for granted. It was pervasive. So I grew up in a very normal school, but it was still Church of England.
Yeah.
We still sung our hymns every morning. Friday there'd be an assembly with a vicar. We'd go over to the church. We'd be on the old mahogany pews, which they've taken out now, which I resent. And we'd kneel and we'd do our daily prayers and so on. Lord's Prayer every day. Now we're in a culture where people are saying the Lord's Prayer is gendered, and that's a problem. That was the thing that happened, wasn't it? Where did that happen? It was in Guildford in Surrey. They said they wanted to speak of God in a non-gendered way, which is like a fundamental attack on our sort of everything about our country and Christianity, because the Lord's Prayer was so inherent. We said it every day, and now they're saying that's bad. Yeah. So it was pervasive, and we took it for granted maybe. And here's a little thing for you, a little whimsical remark, but I realised, have you watched Shadowlands?
Yes. It's a
about C.S. Lewis, one of the great movies. Amazing. But I was watching it thinking, this is the world I want to get back to. Not that I was at Oxford, but I was at a village where we had Christianity, we had churches, and it was all normal. That was England. And I suddenly realised, maybe I'm a bit old, but the time that's set in the early 50s is closer to my birthday than my birthday is to now, being the early 80s. Yeah. So I suddenly realised, well, of course that world's gone, Nick. It's actually chronologically makes sense. So we've completely lost that world, it seems to me. We've almost lost Christianity in this country. So I guess my question is, there was a lot of comments there, but why has Christianity declined so much? How do we save it in this country or the West, and can it be saved?
Yeah. I'm actually trying to write a book about this subject at the moment, so I've got a lot of thoughts about it. So, so the question of why, I mean, I don't know what's the more interesting question to talk about here. Is it why it's declined historically, or what our response should be about it, or what?
If we had to pick one,
because if we had to pick one, I was just going to say there's three things. There's at least three things. There's why it's happened. There's the effects of it happening, and then there's what we can do about it. So, I mean, which one of those should I address first?
If I had to pick one, I would say, what can we do about it? Because that's the most urgent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to say something about the effects of it, I think the effects of it are catastrophically bad, and I think they're going to get worse, and we are going to notice it far more. But at the moment, a lot of the evil and the wickedness of our world is very, very much below the surface, although it's surfacing at the moment. I mean, one thing I could point to just right now is I think today is the 55th, when we're recording, is the 55th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, of the legalization of abortion in this country, and since then over 10 million children have been destroyed in their mothers' wombs. And this is ritual child sacrifice that's happening in our nation, and this is unbelievably horrendous what's going on. We're not talking about just single-celled organisms being destroyed. We're talking about sentient human beings who are being ripped apart in their mother's wombs, and the violence that this involves is it's absolutely unspeakable. So this is a besetting sin of our civilization, and we're also seeing this, of course, in the what's going on with the transgender ideology, which again is a kind of ritual child sacrifice. It's the castration and mutilation of children's bodies in the name of a diabolical post-Christian ideology, and the fact that the church is not only not speaking out against this, but is actually by implication endorsing it is a scandal, and it is incurring the judgment of God, upon the church. So I mean, I don't know if I can really state it any more clearly. This is a manifestation of evil in our culture as we turn away from the living God and from the truth, and embrace a satanic agenda. And I think we're going to see this more and more, not only with abortion and with we'll start seeing up to term abortion, we'll start seeing partial birth abortion, we'll see more and more children being mutilated in terms of the transgender ideology, but we'll see this happening much more and more in terms of things like euthanasia and greater levels of sexual perversion. I mean, I think of the way that the attack on children in schools, and the way that children are being shown pornography in schools under the rubric of PSHE or whatever it might be. Anyway, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but basically the decline is in progress. It is absolutely catastrophic, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And the only answer is Christ. It's the only answer is to repent and to turn from this evil. You know, I'm preparing a sermon on John chapter 10 at the moment, and Christ talks about the robber who comes to kill and steal and destroy. And that's what's happening. We are being killed, we are being stolen from, and we are being destroyed as a civilization, as a culture, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. The good news is that there is an answer, and the answer is very, very clear. It's repentance, and it's faith in Jesus Christ, and it's faithfulness to the Word of God. And that's all I can say about this. There is a spiritual battle. It's good versus evil. Get on the right side, trust in Jesus Christ, and be faithful to Him. But Nick, it's got to be a full-on thing. It can't be like, I'm sorry, it can't be just the belief that Christianity is a good force in the world. It can't be a sort of nominal adherence to Christianity. It's got to be a full, fat, metaphysical belief in the reality of good and evil, and a commitment to participate on the side of good, come what may. So I don't know if that's clear enough, but I'm trying not to leave any room for doubt.
That's great. Well, of course, I agree with you. And my friend Lois McClatchy, who was on this podcast, has just tweeted today. Today marks 55 years of the UK Abortion Act. Recent estimates suggest an abortion now takes place in Great Britain every 2.5 minutes. So I agree with you, but how do you convince a moderate... Because I was speaking to someone the other day, and I can't remember who, but it must have been someone vaguely on my side if I was talking to them on the phone. And it was about... And they said, well, yeah, but people just believe that they're not doing a bad thing there. They don't think of it as killing a baby. So that's... Because I agree with what you said there, but that will seem very extreme to some people. So how do you win over people like that?
Well, how do you win over people who say that you're not really killing a baby when you're doing an abortion?
Abortion in this country has become so ingrained that it's like... It's very hard to get anyone to listen. Even sort of reasonably rational people who, sort of, even someone like my mum, it's going to be quite hard to convince them. Even I'll say to her, would you have an abortion? And, that's kind of terrible to think you might have aborted me. And she'll say, of course not. But for other people in general, she'll say that she thinks it's necessary. So this is, in this country particularly, an incredibly hard issue to get anywhere on. And that's just the example you've chosen. Yeah. So, to some people, you'll sound there like a sort of zealot. And how do we get anywhere?
Well, I mean, I think there are at least a couple of things going on here. I mean, when we talk about the issue of abortion specifically, I mean, a lot of this has to do with whether or not the person you're speaking to is actually open to a reasonable conversation. I mean, many people are just so close-minded that they won't even consider that, there could be anything wrong with it. But if you're talking to a reasonable person, I think, and somebody who's reasonably open-minded, I think that you can talk to them about the reality of the existence of a child in the womb, and ask them, like, what do you think is actually happening when somebody is having an abortion? What's happening? Can you describe it to me? Because what I'd say is there's a child who is alive, and it may be a very young child, maybe a child yet to develop in all sorts of ways, but it's still a child and it's being destroyed. Now, do you agree with that? And then it'd be interesting, it's always interesting to hear what people say to that, because they will say, well, it's a fetus or whatever. But ultimately, we do agree, don't we, that a child is being destroyed. Now, under what circumstances is it ethically justifiable to kill children normally? Well, it's never justifiable. So therefore, why is it justifiable to kill a child when it's in the womb? We would never accept the killing of a child for some kind of expedient purpose after they've been born. So why is it okay when a child is in the womb? That would be my sort of basic argument. I mean, the more general strategy, this is kind of my strategy, I suppose, with the podcast and everything like that, is the Irreverent podcast, which I'm not sure we've actually mentioned that, but I should get a plug in for my podcast, Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs. But it's about sowing seed. The parable of the sower. We have to sow the seed. We have to tell the truth and be clear about what the truth is. And lots of people will ignore us, and lots of people will call us zealots, or will say we're crazy, whatever. But some people will listen, and lots of people are waking up. I saw this great tweet today, actually. I mean, I'm not on the right browser, but I saw this great tweet of this guy saying that he was I can't remember what he said. He said he was something like he's like a gay atheist, but he's so disturbed by the way that children are being targeted for indoctrination by this new ideology, particularly I think it was to do with this sex education stuff, that he's actually decided to start going back to church. And his tweet was saying, what am I looking for in going back to church? And my answer was, you're looking for a church which embraces historic Christian orthodoxy. But those are the people that I think we've connected with a lot on our podcast. Is like people who actually are sensing the darkness. They see this madness. They see children being castrated in the name of transgender ideology, or young women having their breasts cut off and having phalluses manufactured out of the tissue from their legs, or whatever it might be. And they're thinking to themselves, this is absolutely insane. What the hell is going on? And you have at that point, when people are waking up, we as Christians need to be there to say, look, this is terrible, this is bad, this is evil, and this is a work of spiritual darkness. But if there is spiritual darkness, if that really exists, if that's really a thing, there must be a spiritual light as well. And let me tell you something about what that light is. So that's my sort of, that's the way I see it.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk, example the other day, a kid died because they tried to take part of, I can't remember if it's his or her colon to make genitalia. And I was just like, this is just as horrific as it gets. What more do you need? And when you mentioned up-to-term abortion, 2 people on GB News advocated for that. People say, oh, this is right-wing channel. We had 2 people who advocated for abortions up to 9 months, which, I mean, no sane person even thinks that. Even that's extremely...
Nick, can you imagine the pain that would cause to that child that's murder? I don't normally, when I speak about abortion, I try not to use the word murder, because I don't want to sort of condemn women who are in terrible situations and they do things which I think are wrong, but there's an understandable element to that, and often women are pressurized into these actions by family members, or by the losers who have impregnated them as well. So I try to refrain from that kind of language. But when you are killing a child, that could, or at least you're saying conceptually, it would be all right to kill a child who half an hour later could actually be out there in the world. I mean, I've watched my 4 children being born. I've watched them being born, and I've seen them. I don't want to be too graphic, but I've seen them coming out, right? And they're the same when they're in there as when they come out. They're human beings. And to kill that child, the violence that you would have to do is inhuman. It's unconscionable.
And as you say, the question in a godless world is why not? Because why not have mutilate 16-year-old kids in the name of trans ideology? Why not kill babies up to 9 months? And there was even in a slightly sillier level, we did a story on Headliners the other day about a throuple. Like, why not have 3 dads? Why not have anything? There's no reason not to, and that's where we are.
So Nick, did you see that thing that Tucker Carlson was doing the other day? There was a video of him shared when he was basically saying, there's a reasonable conversation about abortion where, about, what point does it become a child and everything like that? And what about when the mother's in dire straits? But what we're actually talking about now is we're talking about the glorification of killing children, and that this is just evil. I have to say, I didn't watch the whole clip, but I saw him saying that. And I think he's bang on the money there. Because I can understand how the conversation gets going. I can understand that. I don't agree with it, and I don't think abortion is right. But I can understand people saying, just after conception or something like that. But when you're talking about killing a child just before it's been born, I'm sorry, but you've lost it. You've lost the plot. You are participating in the work of Satan, if that's what you genuinely think. It is a religious phenomenon at that point. It is child sacrifice in the name of your ideology.
And on the theme of how we solve this, what do you think about? So I'm going to link a couple of things here. One is the fact that during COVID, a lot of people came back to the idea of good and evil and came back to the idea of Christianity. I know people who were so shocked by the response, they came back to this by the absurd things that were happening.
Yeah.
But also, the church let a lot of people down by insisting on masks and shutting down.
Yeah.
And my question would be, I know a lot of people. So the Rory, who does the clips for my YouTube channel, who's brilliant, he's a Christian. The designer who designed some of the thumbnails, Andrew, is a Christian. And then I think about other people who work with me on things like our live show, Ben. He's a Mormon, which is like a Christian on steroids. And it's like, there are loads of Christians I know. And then there's another lad at GB, and they're really great. But they say to me, so someone said to me the other day, well, the problem isn't it with the church now? It's outmoded because it's centralized and it's a central place in a town, whereas now everyone's getting everything from the internet and everything's dispersed. So my question is, you probably run a based church, but there's a lack of based churches, and there's a lot of young Christians who are nominally Christian, but they don't have a church. They may not even have a denomination. And I say I'm kind of in this camp. Yeah. And furthermore, a little addendum to that question: do we have to leave the Church of England because it's so woke?
Okay, yeah. So, so there's a lot there. Please don't leave the Church of England. That would be my first sort of quick answer to that second question. And we can come back to that if you'd like to. But I think the broader question is about the church. So I believe in the church 100%. You can't have the church without Christianity. Jesus Christ said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." There have always been enemies of the church, externally and internally. This is a reality which is predicted in the New Testament by Christ himself. Wolves in sheepskin clothing, many antichrists have gone out into the world, and all this kind of stuff. Read the New Testament. This is an expectation of Christ and of the writers of the New Testament. So there's a battle. The battle's out there, but the battle's also in here as well. So that's why I say, don't leave. I mean, I understand why people have to leave sometimes their churches, including the Church of England. I understand that, and I'm not unsympathetic to it. But if you can, don't leave, because we need faithful, orthodox Christian believers in the church to fight for what is true. And if we abandon the church, then that's precisely what we're doing, isn't it? We're abandoning it to the wolves, and then they will come in, and then they will devour the flock, and that's not what we want. So we want Orthodox Christian faithful believers to be in the church and to fight for it. Now, I mean, I could go through all of the reasons that Christ instituted the church, but that might be somewhat tiresome. I suppose what I would say is that God desires a people for himself. We're not just individuals in this earth, although we are, but God calls us to be a people as well. The body of Christ is the metaphor that the Apostle Paul uses in the New Testament. God desires a body on this earth, a corporate body that enacts his purposes and his will in this world, and he's endowed it with supernatural gifts, the sacraments of the church, baptism and the Eucharist, the presence of the Holy Spirit among the people of God, a people that gathers together to worship and praise God and to give him the honour that's due his name, even when the rest of humanity are ignoring him and blaspheming him. And I could go on and on about this, but the church is a real thing. It was instituted by Christ. One further point about this, Nick, is that don't allow your perception of the Church of England as it is at the moment to colour your entire understanding of what the church is. The church is not the present day Church of England and the pronouncement of a few woke bishops. The Church of Jesus Christ has existed for 2,000 years. It is global. It is Catholic. It's not just on earth, but it's in heaven as well. All the believers who have lived and died are now in heaven with God. So the church exists on earth now, and it exists in heaven as well. The church will continue beyond this time for as long as history continues until Christ returns, and it will ultimately number a multitude upon multitude. There are false believers in the church. There are people who are part of the institution, the visible institution of the church, who are not real believers, and they will be exposed for what they are. So that would be the final thing I'd say about it. Focus on that spiritual reality of what the church actually is, and not the manifestation of the visible institution. The Articles of Religion of the Church of England itself, Article 26 of the 39 Articles, actually gives voice to this reality that sometimes, I think it says, naughty men will be in power in the church, and unfortunately that is what we see quite a lot of the time in the Church of England today. But as I say, there's nothing shocking here. This is the reality. This is the battle we face.
So we don't have to leave because Welby is a fool.
Well, no, we don't. No, and that's what I'm saying. It's like it's not a reason to leave. That's what people always say to me. It's like they say to me, well, why? How can you stay in the church when people are saying this, when they're talking about gay blessings? And I say that's precisely the reason I want to be in this church, because I want to contend for the truth, and I don't want to abandon my people. What's going to happen if I leave? My people are they're going to be like. They're going to be lambs to the wolves. They won't have anyone, and they will be exposed. So we have a responsibility. People who know the truth have a responsibility. If we abandon the truth, if we abandon the church, we're abandoning these people. Now, obviously, I understand that sometimes you have to leave, and sometimes it goes too far. But all I'm saying is that there's got to be this reflex, which is, no, actually, I'm staying here, right? I'm staying. That's my basic commitment. It's like my marriage. Like, I'm staying in my marriage, right? There's no way I'm leaving. That's it, and maybe something might happen, it won't, trust me. But, maybe something might happen that would cause a divorce. But that's like last case scenario. We've got to commit ourselves. And so, there's no perfect church. We can't have this situation where we're leaving churches every 5 minutes just because there are a few heretics around. That's always the way the church is. So I'm ranting a bit here, but,
No, it's good. It's a great answer, because a lot of young people seem to be struggling with this, and even old people like me. So,
yeah.
So on a sort of slightly lighter note, but a similar topic,
yeah.
The church has watered itself down so much is the big problem, isn't it? I mean, the Church of England is so watered down as to become pointless.
Yeah.
Is what people are saying.
Well, yeah.
And someone who said this is Andrew Tate.
Okay.
What do you think of Tate's criticism of Christianity and perhaps his conversion to Islam?
Yeah. Okay. So can I just say something about the Church of England, just in its defence, just first? The Church of England hasn't actually officially changed any of its teaching about anything. So and what the bishops are proposing at the moment with this same-sex blessing thing is a farce, because they're saying that they want to bless gay relationships, but this doesn't actually change the doctrine of the church. So whether they're actually going to be able to do this or not remains to be seen from a legal perspective. And it's my hope they won't be able to, because it clearly does constitute a change in doctrine, even though they're saying it doesn't. And then the other thing I would say about this is that there are lots and lots of faithful priests and ministers and Christians in the Church of England, and there are lots of great Church of England churches out there. Don't get me wrong, there are lots of ones which I would say are more problematic, but there are still great people in the Church of England. There are still great ministers in the Church of England. I've got through my podcast, I met loads and loads of really based priests in the Church of England. So they're out there, and we exist, right? And so you might get lucky, is what I'm saying. You might get lucky and be near a church like this. So don't discount the possibility, because they do exist. So question about Andrew Tate and his conversion to Islam.
And his critique of Christianity.
So his critique of Christianity being what? That it's weak, and
it's basically that Christians themselves are not enforcing it. And his claim is basically that Islam is the only religion that's left, because it's the only one that enforces any of its boundaries and is respected and taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can see the appeal to Islam from that perspective, but I just think it's all the more reason why people need to be why Christians need to be uncompromising in what we believe, and there are plenty of uncompromising Christians out there. I mean, the reason I'm not a Muslim is because I just don't. I mean, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. So I don't think Islam is true. I think it's a false religion. It denies Christ. It denies that Christ is the Son of God. It denies the resurrection, and it's got it just is a false religion. So that's basically my criteria for whether or not I'm a Muslim. So I guess that's the more pressing issue. But I think
they do acknowledge Jesus in some capacity, don't they?
Yeah, they acknowledge him as a prophet, but they specifically repudiate him as the Son of God. So I believe that the mosque, the Dome of the Rock, has written on the walls of it, God has no son. And this, the Islam is in its essence a contradiction to Christianity. It's antagonistic to Christianity because it denies the central claims of Christianity. And yeah, so I mean, but what I was going to say about the Andrew Tate thing is, I mean, I absolutely understand the appeal of Andrew Tate and people like him, because what they're saying is that we need clarity, we need challenge, we need to commit ourselves to a cause which is righteous and worth fighting for. And I agree with all of that stuff wholeheartedly. I'm just saying it's Christ. It's not Muhammad. That's what I'm saying. And there are plenty of examples of Christians throughout history who have done some pretty based things in the name of Jesus Christ. And as I say, you can focus on the wet liberal, largely failing Church of England, but you can also find great examples of inspirational people from the Christian world as well.
All right, brilliant. And here's a really heavy question. You just said that when Jesus returns, I mean, what does that look like in your understanding? That's a big one, isn't it? Just chucking at the end.
Yeah, no, it's fine. What does it look like? Well, so in the Creed, it says he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. So that's what Christ is going to do. He's going to come back and he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. Some will go to his right hand, some will go to his left hand. Some will awake to everlasting salvation, some to everlasting judgment. I mean, I'm speaking picture language. I think what will happen, just to put it a bit more sort of specifically, is Christ will return. I don't know what that actually looks like. My understanding of it is that the souls of the departed will come with him in some way. And they will be, and the dead will be raised. So all human beings who have ever lived will be raised, the righteous and the unrighteous, which is spoken about at the end of the book of the prophet Daniel. The souls of the departed will come with Christ. They'll be reunited with their bodies and resurrected. And everyone who's alive now and everyone who's resurrected will be judged by Jesus Christ. He'll be the judge of all humanity. And as I say, some will be sent to everlasting condemnation. Some will be sent to everlasting felicity in the presence of God. So, yeah, I'm sorry, that might sound quite stark and politically incorrect, but it's as explicit on the lips of Christ as it is anywhere else in the New Testament or in the Scriptures. So, yeah, I don't know. Is that what do you make of that?
No, well, I'm just thinking. I hope I qualify because I don't think of myself as a good person. So I often think, sometimes I do when I look at other people. I think I'm not a good person. Then I look at other people these days and I go, well, I'm still better than a lot of them. So, but I just look at it and think, I hope I qualify.
Well, Nick,
and it kind of reminds.
Go on. I mean, just let me say though, Nick. I mean, it's really, really important point to say is that we'll never stand before God righteous according to our own deeds. Christ's death on the cross is about him offering his life in exchange for us. It's the ultimate act of God's love for us. So we don't bring our good works to God. All we can give God is our faith. That's all we can offer. That's all we can offer God, is to put our trust in him and to put our faith in him. Now we have to be faithful, and we have to try and fulfill his calling in our lives as much as we possibly can. But ultimately we are saved according to God's love and grace and faith. His love and grace and mercy in Jesus Christ. And as I say, all you need is faith. That's all you need.
Okay, well that's handy. I mean, I oscillate on the good person question, but the other thing that okay, so you've answered that. Perhaps it answers my next question, because I was going to say there's a sort of pressure for Christians to be perfect, and we've just seen this again with Stephen Crowder, who you hear some of his behaviour towards his staff and things, and you think, okay, doesn't sound great. But he's now going through this divorce, and I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter about, Christians shouldn't be divorced, and people kind of attacking him. But is there a kind of ridiculous expectation for Christians to be perfect?
Yeah, well, maybe there is, but maybe there is, but I just don't think that necessarily that's very helpful. Look, we need. Just trying to think of how to answer this. So I was having a conversation with my son last night. I mean, being a parent brings this home to me in multiple ways, because I've got four children. They're all 6 and under, so it's a fairly chaotic environment. And I've just noticed about myself that I'm a very, 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 very impatient person. Basically, like having kids that's one of the observations I've made about myself. I can't treat my kids as kindly as I would like to. I can't be as patient with them as I'd like to be. And it's a really hard thing to notice about yourself, that you can't even love your own kids. You can't even rise to that standard of loving your own children and not shouting at them and being mean to them. It's a terrible thing. And so I said to Rafe, my son, I was really honest with him because I got angry with him about something. And I said to him, I am sinful. You may have done something wrong, but I'm sinful as well. And we're all sinful. We're all sinful people. We're all broken. We all do things which are wrong before God, and we all need God's love and forgiveness. And that, to my mind, is at the heart of the gospel. And that's the thing that actually transforms us as well. That though we are sinful, God still loves us and accepts us and wants us. He wants our pathetic contribution. He wants that anyway. So yes, we fail. Marriages fail, and it's an awful thing when marriages fail. It's horrible, to quote to speak like Jordan Peterson for a moment. It's bloody horrible. It's like the worst thing you can possibly imagine. I've not had a failed marriage, thank God, but I've seen people who have, and it's awful. It's devastating. Right? But the message of the gospel is that even in that context, the grace of God still avails for you in your life, right? And that grace is transformative, and that grace is redemptive. And it's redemptive even in the context of absolute personal disaster. It's the power of God to save us and to heal us and to make us whole. So if people are condemning Stephen Crowder, I'm sorry, I don't really know very much about this story, but if people are condemning him in the name of Christ, they need to take a second look at what the message of the gospel actually is, because the message of the gospel is about human redemption. It's not about condemning people because they've lived less than perfect lives. I mean, read the Gospels if you think that that's the case. So that's what I thought.
All right, wow. Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to top that. Maybe we should end, because I think that's a great ending. Where can people find you, Jamie? You mentioned your podcast, of course, Irreverend. So they can look for that on all platforms, I presume. Yeah,
so Reverend Faith and Current Affairs. Yeah, we are on YouTube, but people basically pick us up most of the time on audio podcasts. So it's absolutely everywhere. It's on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms. We have a website as well, so people can find us there most easily at reverendpod.com. reverendpod.com. It's me and 2 other, in inverted commas, based vicars. Tom Pelham and Daniel French, and we talk about the news. It's kind of like a vicar's version of Weekly Skeptic, really. I mean, we have a little scripture section and stuff, and we respond to emails in most episodes as well. But basically, that's what we do. We talk about the news and we try and analyze it from a spiritual perspective. It started when the COVID thing was kicking off. Tom and I started it because we wanted to say something different to what the institutional church was saying about the COVID-19 situation. But it's developed from there. It's lots of fun. So yeah, irreverendpod.com if you want to find us.
All right, and you're on Twitter as well. What is your Twitter?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is jfronkel, which is not my name, but J is in the letter J, and then Fronkel, which I sort of thought sounded like a kind of Germanic version of my actual surname, Franklin. So JFRONKL. So that's, if you want to follow me on Twitter. I don't think my Twitter account is particularly interesting, by the way, but if you want to follow me, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, you made it quite hard for people to find you, but it's Jay Fronkel. So make sure you find that. And make sure you listen to a Reverend Pod. It's very, very good. They had a great interview with Peter Hitchens, and it's just very good in general.
Thanks.
Very interesting. Like you say, a vicar version of the Weekly Skeptic.
Nick, can I just say something before we end? Because there was something I wanted to say to you before we end, which I was thinking about earlier. Is that I think it's really, really good how you're really clear on the issues. I think particularly your pro-life statements on the Weekly Skeptic and elsewhere. I think it's great that you say things like that because a lot of the time people are pro-life or they have a problem with abortion, but they're scared to say it in public. But you say it really, really clearly, and I think that's really important because you have a public platform. It gives other people permission to go as far as you go. So it's an example of leadership and courage. So thank you for doing that. And I think it's also really important when you correct Toby when he uses the fake pronouns as well. Now I know Toby's such a congenial person that I think for him it's not even an issue. He's just trying to get his point across. So I'm not sort of criticizing him or anything like that. But I think that's really, really important. When somebody refers to Dylan Mulvaney as she, and you say he, that's the right thing to do because you're speaking the truth. So all I want to say, Nick, is I think it's great that you're doing that. I don't hear many people doing that in the public sphere, and I just want to commend you and say to keep going, particularly with the abortion thing. Keep saying that and say it on GB News and wherever else you appear as well.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very nice. Yeah, I just happen to be like that for some reason. I mean, someone said to me the other day, are you high in disagreeableness? And which is a psychological trait. And I said, no, actually, I'm actually reasonably high in agreeableness. Yeah. It'd be nice if I was. There's some people that seem to enjoy the conflict. I get attacked on Twitter. I don't enjoy it at all. I'm very, very sensitive, but I just have to. I've got a weird thing where I'm not trying to boast. I have to tell the truth for some reason. I thought everyone was doing this till I was about 30, and it turns out they're not. Yeah. No. So I'm just like that for some reason. So I don't take too much credit.
Keep going. Speak the truth, regardless. Come what may. Speak the truth about these things.
Okay, I'll continue to do that, and thank you very much. And make sure you go to a reverend. And can I say one more thing, just as a little tip? Have you heard of this Tolkien movie, Jamie, which is called Tolkien's Lord of the Rings: A Catholic Worldview? Have you ever heard of that?
No, I've not heard of that, no.
It's a strange little movie I think people should check out. And we were talking about something much earlier in the podcast, and everyone should go to this clip, Lewis and Tolkien Debate Myths and Lies. And it's two actors reenacting a discussion between Lewis and Tolkien about Christ and why this story is true. Yeah. And so everyone should go to that clip. And I just wanted to say it because people might not have heard that.
Yeah. Sounds great. I've not heard of it, but I'll check it out.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. There's so many things I could talk to you about. Like, I feel like I've got a whole other hour and a half, so hopefully we'll do it again.
Well, listen, I'd love to do it again. And you were going to come on a Reverend before, and I messed it up because it wasn't really a mess up, but I was genuinely unwell, and I was absolutely gutted about that. So I'd love to have you on, for some banter with me and the other two Revs at some point. So please, let's do that.
Absolutely, we'll do that. All right. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.